Good morning and welcome to Crack the Mic podcast with Agent of Change, DeCorey Davis. And this week's segment is entitled Racism in America is a Learned Behavior. And to help me further this discussion, I have a sagacious panel, which includes Keon Payton, Senior Pastor of the New Bethel Missionary Baptist Church in Pontiac, Michigan, Executive Director of Community Outreach for Realm Films International, and a graduate of Princeton Theological Seminary. Attorney Michael T. Davis, an established attorney and minister of the gospel. He also serves as the president of the Florida Statewide Association of Black Lawyers, and most recently secured a settlement valued at $4.5 million for an unarmed Black teen who was paralyzed by police after being shot in the back for the law firm Cooney and Davis Law, PA. He's also barred in both Florida and New York. Jeffrey Watson, former Miami-Dade County City Commissioner for District 5. Dr. David Bullock, a gifted genius. He's a teacher, lecturer, pastor, artist, and a social commentator that has appeared on MSNBC's The Ed Show, The Rachel Maddow Show, Russia Today, Jesse Lee Peterson Radio Show, and Sirius XM's The Joe Madison Show. He's also a contributor to the New York Times, UK Daily, USA Today, just to name a few. Last but not least, motivational speaker, owner of Crown Security Company, and executive director to the podcast, Isaiah Wallace. Good morning, guys. Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning. Good morning.
It's been often said that sticks and stones may break my bones, but words cannot hurt me. However, I argue to the contrary because words are powerful and can have a long-lasting effect. In fact, in a blog written by Dr. Haider Zahid titled The Power of Spoken Words, he used a quote from Yehuda Bergs, and I quote, "Words are singularly the most powerful force available to humanity," end quote. And I couldn't agree with him more because we've seen the long-lasting impact of words or racial jargon used in the past by white racists like the N-word, Negroes, and colors that have reverberated throughout the history of this country, the United States of America, and how it has aided in the mistreatment of people of color. In fact, in that same article mentioned before, the writer cautioned us by saying, considering the powerful force of the words we utter, we must discipline ourselves to speak in a way that conveys respect, gentleness, and humility. Okay, let's just dive into this, or delve rather, into this discussion. And let me just ask the panel, if I may. Do you believe that words are powerful, spoken, written, or simply the words we use in our mind? All words have potential power. And if so, why or why not?
Well, DeCorey, I think that's a great question. And again, thanks for inviting me to be on the panel. This is David Bullock. I think definitely trivially true. Words are powerful. You mentioned the sticks and stones. I mean, most people heard that at some point, I guess, in their childhood some years ago. I mean, but the truth is that words definitely impact our lives, both positively and negatively. I think what's interesting for this conversation, though, is not just talking about words. It's not just the N-word or colored or Negro. It's the way words participate in a larger infrastructure or institutional structure. Say, for instance, being identified as Black or a Negro, and because of that, there is a substandard service. Just to give a more specific example, there used to be physical segregation of the races, say, in public facilities. So being called Black wasn't just a word, as it were.
Right.
It was a word that determined a outcome. And so that's what makes race and racism and racist language, racist speech so dangerous. It's not just the words, it's the way the words track the outcomes and disparity.
I couldn't agree with you more, Dr. Bullock. You want to go ahead and share your sentiment on this here question, Attorney Michael Davis?
Sure. Yeah. When I think about this question of words having power, it really is obvious to a certain extent when someone looks at you and uses the N word, or they call you colored, or they use some other racist term that has historically been used with Black people. Just the very utterance of that word says so much about that person. For example, the person who calls you colored, if they're old, you think they're not aware. They don't know that times have changed.
Absolutely.
The person who uses the N word toward you and says the N word and uses that face, you know that they're racist. You know that they think that you're less than because of the color of your skin. And that's all because of the use of one word. Words are powerful.
I couldn't agree with you more, Attorney Davis. Mr. Watson, you want to share your sentiment on this here as well?
Yeah, I mean, I'll share my sentiment, but clearly, and I perceive myself, I may not be a little bit older than you guys in one respect. And that has brought on being in different places and with different people at different times. And at the end of the day, words cut both ways. Words cut both with what we say and what people are saying to us. And at some point, there's been an insulation from someone a little bit older because those words were more prevalent back then than they were today. And so at some point, we got to get out of spiral though, because we're all racist in some respect. And we all use words in some respect. And so at some point, what then does that continue to become a hook that allows you now a get out of jail card or a free pass card? Sure, it is. But I was taught by mama, they got a problem with you, they got a problem. They got the problem because you can't change who you are. Lord made you the way you are. And so you must be strong about who you are because you can't change that. Now, they may do something to you or attempt to do something to you because of who you are. But you can't allow yourself to be stopped because of who you are. Because if you do, then what then do you do? Sit down for life? No, you can't do that. And so, yes, words do. And we in America have a cultural, the cultural phenomenon is that racism is real. I thought when I was a little boy, it would no longer last because of what it meant, those words. And yet here I am at the age I am, and it's still being said and used. And so now, and why is that? Because of a question we're going to have later. Is it taught? Of course it is. Okay. It's taught all around. And so you're right. And the question does speak to itself. Words do affect us, but they affect all of us. And so we have to just be careful going forward as we are all teachers and influencers of thought to ensure that, yes, they do, but that's just one more challenge that we're going to overcome because we have to. We don't have a choice. So.
Thank you for sharing, Mr. Watson. Isaiah, you want to go ahead and share your sentiment on that?
Yes. I'd just like to say, words have to be powerful because in my belief system, God was able to bring everything into fruition with just his words. They accomplished the task immediately after he said them.
Powerful.
To me, the same thing happens when someone utters the N word. Their goal is to make you a victim, to make you less than, to make you feel out of character, to jostle you, so to speak. And because that is their aim, and because you, for whatever reason, are in the circumstance with that person, they're able to affect you with just their word. So they have to be powerful.
I echo that sentiment, Isaiah. You want to go ahead and share your thoughts on this here, Reverend Peyton?
Yes, and thank you, Brother Davis, for the invitation and allowing us to share tonight in the panel. I agree wholeheartedly with a lot of what has already been said from the previous panelists. I certainly believe that words matter. I appreciate what the brother just offered with respect to the power of words relative to faith. How when God spoke, worlds came to be. When I think about those words of our brother who just previously shared, the scripture comes to mind that death and life are in the power of the tongue. And what we say absolutely does matter. I think it matters in two ways. I think it matters on the part of the individual who's speaking and the intention behind the words that are being offered. I think it was Dr. Bullock who referenced the understanding that words can be oppressive. I think it matters the intent of the person who's speaking those words, but I also believe it matters in how those words are interpreted. So, for example, if we're using the term, nigger, or the N word, rather, it was a word that was used with terrible intent, and yet today, as African Americans, we know that words that often were used to demonize, we found ways to in the words of our grandmothers would say, take lemons and make lemonade. And so I think that when people take words, it's important for what they believe about those words and what they believe about themselves in the words that are being spoken. While words can be oppressive, and with the intent of those who mean it that way, I also think that words can be spun through a lens of faith that gives people hope to rise from those systems of oppression. So absolutely, words matter. I think it matters from the perspective of the person who's intentionally using them, but it also is very important for how they're interpreted in the hearer.
I welcome that sentiment, Reverend Peyton, and I couldn't agree with my panel more, because words are kind of like birds in a cage. Once released, they never come back. But let me ask this question, if I may. Do you believe that words used in the past, like the N-word, Negroes, and colored, have set the stage for the mistreatment of African Americans? Go ahead and share your thoughts, Attorney Davis, if you may, please.
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I think the answer is yes. When you look historically to how these words were used, they were used for the purpose of branding people of color. And with that brand came mistreatment. And I think as generations have gone on, those same words, the N-word, Negro, colored, all of those words have been used to brand Black people, and based off of that brand, then mistreat them. The branding was not a word to affirm, it was a word to devalue. And you cannot separate the use of those words from mistreatment.
Absolutely. I welcome that sentiment, Attorney Davis. You want to go ahead and share, Dr. Bullock?
Yeah, I don't know if those words set the stage for mistreatment. I think those words are indicative of mistreatment. I mean, the majority of the folks that end up being called colored or the N-word or whatever get to America as slaves. Slaves are legally, politically, economically, and socially dead. The Dred Scott decision is clear, right? A Black man has no rights that a white man, a white court, a white woman, a white bank, a white president, a white world should recognize. Charles Mills helps us understand this in terms of the global context of globalized white supremacy as an institutional system. The words are important, but the words are manifestations of a system. And I think what's interesting to me about Black folk particularly is that we are so infatuated and sometimes fetish on the words, but we have not decoded the system.
Powerful. Wow, That's powerful. I thank you for sharing that, Dr. Bullock. I echo that sentiment. You want to go ahead and share, Mr. Watson?
Yeah, I have to agree with him in a lot of respect. And it just hit me a couple of days ago, because everything is in context. I mean, we're looking in a rearview mirror now, but when you're talking about words, I mean, just as much as a word can be a negative word, and it was done in negative haste, uh, people who speak words can uplift a nation. Okay, our last Laurel poet laureate, and the name shoot right through me, but of course I'll talk about the young one, Amanda Goldman. Notwithstanding the older one when I came through in the administration, Maya Angelou, right? I mean, they uplift the nation with their words. So the word in itself, and I agree with Pastor, the word itself in the context of, in the content that existed, look, Booker T. Washington gave speeches, and as you went through the years, we came as slaves. Right, slaves are dead. I believe they may be dead, but we continue to live a slave mentality, and that's our problem. Okay, but the colored man was accepted as a colored man, and intellectuals may have used that as a word and a description at that time. And then we went to another iteration, and it was the Negroes. And then for my most intellectual, they used that word. It wasn't a harmful word, it was a descriptive word. But people who were now against us used the word in a different context. And it's always, as someone just said, the context in which you use it is what makes the word either powerful or negative or hateful.
That's powerful, Mr. Watson. Isaiah, you want to go ahead and share your sentiment on this question, sir?
Yes, sir. Honestly, I don't believe that it set the stage. I don't believe that the words they use are as important as the context, like some of the panelists were saying, or to me, the intent, you know what I mean? Like, if someone wants to degrade you, you know, they're going to use the sharpest sword that they have, the sharpest tool that they have, rather, to do that. And they have to have, you know, a malice, a sort of malice to get to the levels of oppression that are associated with the N-word or Negroes or color. You know, to me, that's much more than seeing a colored water fountain. You know, to me, if I was around in those times, I would be afraid of the person that's lynching more than them calling me a Negro or anything. And I would say that the terrorists, the person that's willing to harm me because of my race, they are what set the stage for oppression, not quite the words themselves.
I couldn't agree with you more. You want to go and share your thoughts, Pastor Peyton?
Yeah, I continue to echo the sentiments of each of the panelists. You know, the main thing for me goes back again to intent. What I was reflecting on, just as the brother was just sharing, I think it was also Brother Isaiah who mentioned Jesus being the Word made flesh. When I think about that particular text in John 1:1, Jesus becoming flesh, I think about words being personified. What do you want those words to look like? And I guess what took me down that rabbit hole in my thoughts, as the others were sharing, was the fact that for the past couple of days, we've been talking about words of Chris Rock and how those words were interpreted and therefore facilitated the confrontation of Will Smith and Chris Rock. And what words did he choose to say? Folks will say, well, the words that he chose were not words that were hateful or harmful, but understanding the way that they could have been conveyed with the context of her illness, it could have been perceived as being personified as cruel. So again, I think it just goes back to the spirit and the intent of the words, because as we use them, they should be used to uplift humanity. They should be used to give life to humanity. And I think oftentimes when our spirit or intent is not aligned with the desire of being liberating or life-giving, they also, or they conversely rather, can do the very opposite in causing significant detriment and harm. And oftentimes words and the pain and scar that words can leave often can last much longer than physical cuts and bruises. And so I think we have to be very careful as we choose the words that we are trying to convey to ensure that the intent is in alignment with one's social emotional well-being.
Okay, I couldn't agree with you more, but just the latter part of your statement, Pastor Peyton, I want to kind of play the devil's advocate for a moment, if I may, because oftentimes we say that words, they have the power to liberate or to even set one in bondage. But I want to ask this question to the panel. Why is it appropriate for African Americans to use that word, the N word, even if it's used as a term for endearment, or for let's say if a guy's hanging out with his friend and he's saying, hey, hey, the N word, it's acceptable on that level, but it's not acceptable for white folks to use it. Just help me understand that. Why is it acceptable to be used as a term of endearment, but it becomes just inflammatory speech if a white person uses it?
Well, Decory, let me jump in right on this, because this question is a bigger question, and depending upon what someone says and answers, and because of the cancel culture, the commissioner, I think, or one of the brothers in the discussion already mentioned age and time and context, right? So when Richard Wright wrote Black Boy, when Richard Wright wrote Invisible Man, he was a Negro capital N writer. Okay, that's what he was. That's how he described himself. When the CME Church started itself, it was the colored Methodist Church. See, in this TikTok, Twitter, anti-historical, anti-intellectual culture that we have, right? We don't have a sense of context. Black folk called themselves colored too. Black folks called themselves Negro capital N too. Jesse Jackson in the 80s and others came up with African American because we wanted to reach back to Africa and reach backwards from Africa to America. So we were African American. Then we were Black, right? In the 70s, we want the funk and we want to be Black, right? Now hip hop came, okay, and there's a great song by NWA called "I'm a Nigga, She's a Nigga, We a Nigga, We Some Niggas. Wouldn't you like to be a nigga too?" Okay. Right? I'm gonna be a nigga for life. Tupac took nigga and then made it an acronym. Now, this is all I want to say. We can do whatever we want to do with words. There is no word police, no word jail. We can do what we want with words. Why can't white people do with words what we do with words? Simple answer. Because what we as a family do with words. People who are not a part of that family, who do not have that history, they do not have permission to do the same thing. I think it's as simple and as plain as that.
Okay, so let me ask you, Dr. Bullock, if I may, because we know that the great rap hip hop artist Eminem has done a lot to further the culture, hip hop culture. And we say we like to claim it as our musical genre, be as it may. Eminem himself doesn't feel that it's appropriate to use that word and we have, quote unquote, given him the black pass card, so to speak.
Look,
So I
mean,
just don't understand. I think it's very, very offensive.
Whether or not Eminem feels comfortable using the word or not, right? There have been historic, again, context. Mick Jagger sang the blues. Okay, he's a blues man before he's a rock and roller. We just don't remember the history. He sang Howlin' Wolf. He sang Muddy Waters. Okay, he used the idioms of black folks. Elvis Presley sang Hound Dog. He got that from Big Mama Thornton. You ain't nothing but a hound dog, ain't Elvis. That's black folks. So white folk have appropriated black idioms in music and artistry before Eminem. He ain't special. Okay. and when we allow them to appropriate our idioms, it is because they have a respect for the artistry and for the particular musical idiom that they have adopted. Now, in the hood or in black circles, we do all kinds of things white folks don't do. And I don't even know why we want white folks to do them. When we shake hands, we don't even shake hands. We touch elbows, we slap knees, we rub the back of people's head. I mean, I don't understand why black folk are so concerned about what white folk are doing with black idioms.
Okay, I digress on that one. Isaiah, you have a question. You want to go ahead and share your question, Isaiah, for the panel?
Yes. According to an article in the Boston Globe titled Racism Learned by James H. Burnett III, which cites the research of Mahzarin Banaji, a renowned Harvard University psychologist, brain researcher, and racism and physical prejudice expert. I quote, "Children are able to understand racial bias at 3 to 4 years old," end quote. He goes on to say that if a child experiences consistent in-group and out-group interactions, that is to say, if the consistent interactions between their race and another race has either a positive or negative effect of reinforcing their racial biases or reinforcing their tolerance for those different from them. As Mr. Burnett put it, the good news is that even a child whose parents makes no conscious effort to teach them not to be prejudiced can shed the prejudice if he finds himself in a diverse enough place and consistently observes in-group and out-group people interacting positively and as equals. My question, do you believe that racism is a learned behavior? And if so, why or why not?
Yeah, I mean, look, clearly it's a learned behavior. But it's a learned behavior all the way around. I agree with it. And I'm not so sure who spoke and said we digress, but we didn't digress. See, the issue really is context. And the issue is, yes, it's learned. You got to know it's learned. Something is learned. You can't be that off. When a young white kid, 21 years old, sit up in a church service for 2 hours and then decide he's going to shoot 11 black people who had nothing to do with him, nothing did to him, okay, or asked nothing of him, and he didn't know him. That had to be learned. That's learned. Now, where he broke with his mental capacity or mental faculties to deal with life as it is, but some was learned because he just can't get to that point by himself. Not at 21, 41. Okay, we can have a discussion, but at 21, okay. And it's so clearly it is learned. It is learned all the way around because we learn things subconsciously and consciously. Okay? I was in that era when I was taught contrary to what the general discussion was. They don't think you can read, or they don't think you can write, or they don't think you can count. So you must learn how to do that. Integrate schools, and all of a sudden, they don't think it. They just put you in another classroom, and you never wind up doing it. So it's always about context, and it's always about subconscious and conscious, and most of it comes consciously. A whole lot of it comes subconsciously. And so, yes, it is. But that's our culture, okay? We don't learn to be an integrated America. We don't learn. There are a lot of folks who think we're not Americans. There's some folks who don't even think Puerto Rico is the United States, right? And yet, okay, Brazilians, they're all Brazilians. I don't care what color they are, they're all Brazilians. Not to say there's not racism, it's economic, but we are not going to live as all Americans, okay? Because we are taught differently, and they are not like us. I don't care if you live in a trailer in the Appalachians, you're taught they are not like us, okay? And that's why people will make the mistake. I walk in a restaurant with a suit and I'm the maitre d'. No, I'm not the maitre d'. I'm somebody to sit down and eat, okay? Because that's what we are taught. So.
Well stated, Mr. Watson.
Yeah.
You want to go ahead and share, Attorney Davis?
Yeah, you know, the commissioner has really made a lot of good points, and I tend to agree with a lot of what he said. You know, I have a 4-year-old, and you know, she understands differences in race. She understands that, you know, she sees the black baby doll hair and she says, oh, her hair is just like mine. She sees another black person. She understands that that little black girl is just like her. But what she does not do is she doesn't look at people who are different and think that they're less than. So I think you understand that there's a difference, but the point of treating someone less than because of the difference is a learned behavior.
I welcome that sentiment, Attorney Davis. You want to go ahead and share your sentiment, Reverend Payton?
Yeah, I couldn't agree anymore with Attorney Davis. And I have 2 young girls. My oldest is 7 and my youngest is 4. And they go to a predominantly white, well, my oldest daughter goes to a predominantly white school, and her hair is much different than her classmates. And I remember very vividly when she came home and talked about the distinct figures that, or the distinctions that she has that are different from her classmates. And I feel that there's a term that everyone's kind of throwing around in corporate spaces and other spaces, this notion of diversity, equity, and inclusion. I think we have to do a better job of teaching ourselves and each other the importance of bracing differences, because regardless of whether it's going to be a matter of race, there are many other things that distinguish us. And, you know, people often say that, you know, people will forget the words that you say to them, but they'll never forget how you made them feel or make them feel. And when someone is made to feel like the stranger, or when someone is made to feel less than, you never forget that feeling, and you never forget who makes you feel that way. And so again, you know, I don't think it's a matter of race. I think it's a matter of being more intentional in creating spaces that are diverse, that celebrate diversity, that celebrate not just equity and inclusion, but are intentional in making people feel like they belong. And in the matter of race, I think even now, you know, as a Black man in America, there are some places that no matter how educated I am, and no matter how much financial resources that I may have in my pocket, I know that feeling when I'm made to feel like I don't belong. And so, you know, those feelings you don't forget. Those feelings are very harmful. And I think that as we educate ourselves and educate others, it's going to be important that we speak to the reality of being more intentional in creating spaces that are diverse, where people feel they belong.
But was that experience harmful, or was it shocking to you?
Well, at 43
I
years
mean,
old,
because really,
yeah.
see, in a different way, the old dude, it was scary. But now I'm not minimizing it rolling forward, but I'll give you mine, one of them, 2, and then I'll ask, was it harmful or was it shocking to you?
There's an awkward
Pastor?
silence.
Well, I'm reflecting. I think both. I think it's shocking that in 2022, I would still have to be made to feel that way. And I think it's hurtful because I wonder, to what extent are my children being made to feel that way? And I can certainly speak up for myself, but for persons who may not be able to speak up for themselves, how does that make them feel? And what does that say about the world in which we live today, that we still have people that feel that it's okay to make others to feel like they're less than?
I know I never wanted to grow up to be the old angry black man. So I've kind of tried to balance the world at large in my space. I can go back, I can go back 36 years ago. And I was the chief of staff of a mayor. I had a car. Not only did I have a car, I had a marked car. I left for dinner in a tuxedo, going to see a friend of mine who was leaving the next day. I didn't have the option to wait for the next day because she was leaving the next day. I found myself in Kendall, not trying to find the address, and I got stopped. Now, bear in mind, what do? That's different time. Probably not as older than some of you guys. Different time. What do? And I got stopped because, what are you doing in that car on a Saturday? I said, because it's mine. Make the call. So where are you coming from? Why is it you need to know that? I had a tuxedo on. I had a tuxedo on. Right? And yet I was in Kendall looking for that address, probably 10:30, 10:45. And who are you that you could have a car taken home? Make the call. Make the call. Okay, that's what you want to know. You make the call. And I mean, I took it as it is, because I guess for a lot of us, that was the time of day. Okay. And yet I had an instance where I was with my mother driving, ran a light mistakenly downtown Flagler Street, stopped me, where you going in a hurry? Who's that you with you? My mother. Okay, cool. Be careful because you got your mom with you. Let me go. And so, it's been an interesting sort of relationship on the whole police side and shock side, because I've been shocked. I've never been in a scared situation, but yes, in a shock situation, because we all here have been taught to do well, do good, do well, do good. You will succeed, regardless of the context, content, and age category. We all, I can hear by the descriptions, have been taught that. And yet sometimes it's exasperation, because you run up in a situation and you've done that. I mean, look, that's the whole essence of people being exasperated, pissed off, and mad about Big Duffy. He wasn't the brother on the corner. That's not who he was. And so sometimes when you get it, you're like shocked. Okay, I'm quite sure Mike has had that. Okay, in his travels, because we all have. And I just asked because I thought that it's important sometimes, because we are now all dispensers of information, and how we now teach those behind us become important. Because I think it's only then that it's going to change. Sorry.
Absolutely. No problem. No problem. Dr. Bullock, you want to go ahead and share your thoughts on the question, do you believe that racism is a learned behavior in America? And if so, why or why not?
Well, I mean, just to affirm the conversation that we've been having, it's a very powerful conversation. Of course it is. I think everybody said that. I do want to mention, though, in terms of this, we keep coming back to context and history. So there was a time when people thought races were biologically constituted. Even W.E.B. Du Bois wrote a powerful piece called "The Conservation of the Races" in his early sociological career. Speeches. Right. Yeah. And even he was a part of that school of thought. So people thought, it's like people get taught this in church, I think, still today,
because church is just old, right? But it's like the yellow man, the white man, the black man, red man, that kind of thing. People think this stuff is biological, or used to, is what I wanted to say, right? It's not biological. There's only one race, the human race.
Absolutely.
And so race is socially constructed. So your question is a powerful question, because the mere fact that race is socially constructed, so the daughter can recognize the difference between herself and someone else without devaluing the difference, that's race, right? Racism is the devaluation and the institutional disparity tied to phenotypical or biological characteristics. All of this is socially constructed. And
Absolutely.
so yes, it is learned. And somebody said it's as American as apple pie.
I welcome that sentiment, Dr. Bullock. And I agree with the panel. I do believe that racism is indeed a learned behavior, because words are expressions that come from the soul, in my view, that ultimately have the power to shape one's reality. And if is shared by a collective body, can dictate a societal norm. So we'll leave it there. I want to just, if we can, change the tides for a moment. And I want to deal with the psychological aspect of racism and kind of try to just ask this question. I want to formulate the question, but I want to build it around this school of thought that's recognized inside of psychology. It's called telepathy. And we know telepathy is the process of thoughts transferences. And there was a study done in the 30s by J.B. Rhine. He used something called the Zener cards to help determine the precognitive effects and also the telepathic ability. But it was later ruled ineffective due to some sensory leakage or even cheating or even both. But for the purpose of the study, it was used to test the ESP, or the extrasensory perceptions, which in short, listeners, is just the sixth sense, what some would say. Now, some racists may be sitting there thinking, if we're using telepathy with respect to inheriting this damnable trait or school of thought, racism, I want to ask this question because some racists may believe my dad was a racist, so naturally up next is me. So I want to ask this question to the panel. Can a racist mentality be inherited in your view?
This is
Of course it
Peyton.
can. I'm sorry, Pastor. Go ahead. I'll defer
No,
you.
go. All right. Well, I would say, of course, it can as well. I think that it definitely starts that way because children typically pick up the school of thought of their parent.
That's
But
right.
at some point, I feel that as children develop and become their own person in adulthood, it gives us the wonderful opportunity to question, to challenge, and to grow from previous schools of thought and training. And so I feel that it is inherited. It starts that way, but just because it starts that way doesn't mean that it has to end that way. And the onus becomes upon the person who matures from their childhood thinking to becoming their own man or woman.
It's like that old adage on computer in, computer out, or garbage in, garbage out. Look, any behavioral tendencies are tendencies that are inherited by the environment that produced them.
Mhm.
And so if you beating on your spouse, then more than likely find those guys who are doing that as an adult. That's what they grew up in. That's a behavioral. And nobody, you know what I mean? That was inherited from the environment. And so the environment gives you the context. You only hope, and you're cognizant. We all seem to be conscious that from Michael, from Pastor, we all seem to be conscious to give those little girls an environment that allows them to be strong and yet now not inherit things we may know that may not necessarily be good for them going forward. Right, but yes, of course, it's inherited. It's just the nature of the beast. Behavioral tendencies are now called and gained from the environment that they are produced in. You know, it's almost like baking something.
And I could not disagree with you guys more, because I do not believe that a racist mentality is something that is innately inherited from a parent. I believe that it's a learned behavior. We become products of our environment. However, I digress. You want to go ahead and share your thoughts, Dr. Bullock?
Nah, I don't really have a lot to say on this. I think it's a very interesting question. I think what you said is what I would say. Racism is not inherited. Okay. Now, if what the brothers are talking about is socialization inside a family, that's not inheritance. That socialization inside a family.
Right.
So but I understand it's a podcast. We're having a conversation. I understand the spirit of what's being said. Right. But there is no transmission of mentality. I don't even know what that is. That sounds very spooky. I mean, you talked about telepathy. There is no, but let's be clear here, right? There are
indoctrination. How would you weave in indoctrination?
Let me finish, Keon. But there are, and I think scientists are doing more in this area. So our DNA does have information, and there is information that is transmitted through DNA, definitely. Typically we talk about that biologic. I think we've left the race and racism are not biological reality. So that's 19th century science. We don't believe that anymore. It's all social construction now. So I think definitely the socialization of a child into racism is the way to think about this. The commissioner mentioned Dylan Roof, right? He walked to the church and shot 9 or 11 Black folks, right? I think what's interesting about the socialization conversation, and I'll end with this, is that the more media becomes unregulated and accessible, the role of families and schools and churches to socialize people becomes diluted. And I think the interesting conversation becomes what happens in a secularized society where diversity, equity, and inclusion is the norm, so that no matter where children are born, that's what they get socialized into.
Okay, I think you, Reverend Peyton, wanted to add something to your thought.
No, I was agreeing with David from the perspective of not transference biologically as much as the learned behavior that's developed in the socialization of that child in their environment that I believe the commissioner was referencing.
Okay, well stated. All right, Isaiah, you want to go ahead and share your thoughts on that?
Yes, I'd agree with the majority of the things that the panelists said, but to me, the missing component would just be the free will of the person, of the child, of the person that's learning the negative attitudes and the negative mentality. To me, it's whether or not this person chooses to internalize those ideas of hate. In my experience, I'd say I was 7 years old and I attended North Twin Lakes Elementary in Hialeah. And there, my teacher refused to teach me and she refused to speak to me unless it was in Spanish. So, wow. I had a very, very hard time because whenever my classmates would speak English to me or try to associate with me, she would punish the only classmate who was willing to do that and force him to be away from me so that I could be isolated. And, it was a crazy thing to me, but it helped me to understand that even though these kids may or may not be hearing the things that she's saying in class to them at home, they're able to make the choice for themselves, whether or not they're going to accept what they've been taught or reject it. You know, that one kid, I remember his name was Adam. He chose to be accepting of me and accept our differences. So, you know, that gave me a totally different, you know, take on whether racism is a learned behavior, because I think that first, to learn, you have to be willing to learn.
Right. Okay. You want to go ahead and we accept that sentiment, Isaiah. You want to go ahead and share your thoughts, Attorney Davis?
You know, at this point, there's not much that I can really add. I think everyone has really addressed it. You know, for me, I sort of think of it as not a learned, you know, not an inherited trait, maybe a predisposition, right? If you have parents who are racist, then I suppose in a sense, one could say that you're predisposed to also being a racist, to the extent more likely than not, that's going to be a part of your socialization growing up in a racist household.
Exactly.
Okay. All right. Unfortunately, we are out of time for this week's segment. Racism in America is a learned behavior. Part 1. And I'd like to thank my sagacious panel, Reverend Keon Payton, Attorney Michael T. Davis, Dr. David Bullock, also former Commissioner Jeffrey Watson, and Isaiah Wallace. However, we would like for you to stay tuned for next week's segment, Racism in America is a Learned Behavior, Part 2. This is your Agent of Change signing off with this segment on Crack the Mic. Peace.